There are certain books that just touch your soul, and this is one of them. Hot Tea and Apricots. And today you don't get just one, but two Kims on the show, because I have Kim Ballentine, who is the author of this book, who's going to be sharing a little bit about her process, what she went through, and writing a memoir. So welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
This is a very moving book, and I told you earlier on that although we pre-record and we've got a whole bunch of other people, I would do yours last because I actually feel a little bit tearful. It's a really bad idea as an interviewer to get tearful in the interview. But this was a really moving book. I told someone earlier on that you had the worst way of working on vocal cords. The process that you had to get your voice back was, it was incredibly moving. So tell me what made you decide to write this book?
So I think, Kim, because I had no voice for so many years, it started at 40 and about a 6-year period of absolutely no voice and then years with voice recovery. My husband wasn't able to attend our sign language classes, and with every sign we were, learning, he and I were just moving further and further apart. And so I began to write. He gave me a computer, a laptop, and I wrote. I captured stories, I captured moments, I captured things I was feeling to keep him engaged in my world. And then when my voice eventually came back, about 13 years after the initial loss of voice, people started asking me to speak about our journey. And they always asked me, but where's your book? Can we buy your book? And I didn't have a book. But I had years and years of journals, entries, of stories I'd written, of emotions I tried to capture. And so I thought, well, I should put this into some kind of book format. In fact, when I had no voice, I decided I would write a book and it would be called Out of the Silence, because I was determined that silence was not going to be my future, that even if my physical voice never came back, I would still have a voice. And so I went on a memoir writing course with no hope in sight of ever having a voice, because they told me it was chronic and permanent. And so when I decided to put it in a book format, I had plotted what the storyline could be. And so it was then quite an intense process of pulling all that material together.
What I loved about the book was that it is so deeply personal. So I say to a lot of my authors on the book coaching program, write with emotion. And the way that you wrote it, because you wrote it in first person, as if it was real time happening, that moment of terror, I can't remember the actual words that you had, but when one of your children came through and they needed to make a telephone call, who to phone, and say, Mommy, what must I do? Who must I phone? That sheer panic, I could feel that. I could transform myself into that space, that if those had been my children, how prepared would they have been? What would they have been able to say? Who would they have called? And so I have to commend you for that, because I felt it in that space as a mother. Was that something that you learned in the course, to write it in first person, or was it just something that you decided?
No, I decided to write it in first person. I think I was writing in first person anyway, because I was writing to keep Rob engaged in my process. And I just felt it was more, it's not a popular method. You don't often get that, but I just felt it was much more powerful. And putting it back together again, I had to go back into those moments and almost relive them. And so first person was easier for me. It was also a form of therapy, I have to tell you, because you're re-engaging with those experiences. So first person just seemed to work for me.
So take me back to that moment, and the audience back to that moment where you first realized there was something wrong.
So it was my 40th birthday, Kim, and my husband had been working at Barra these incredibly long hours. He was a specialist physician and then moved into private practice, and we just never saw each other. So he said to me, what do you want for your birthday? I just wanted time. I think most of us just want time with our men. So he brought me breakfast in bed wearing nothing but a chef's apron, and he has never done that again. It's not allowed in our home. And I started coughing and retching, and by the end of that day, I couldn't easily articulate sound. It came out very staccatoed, and if I tried to speak, my vocal cords went into spasm, into severe laryngeal spasm. So this whole complex closed, and I couldn't move air. I ended up passing out in the bath. And then on the Monday or Tuesday, we were at home alone. Robert gone to a meeting, and my cords closed so severely, I honestly thought I was going to die. And that's the moment you're alluding to when Natalie had to call my brother and he got me to hospital. So just sheer terror. You can't move air. It's like sucking against a balloon. You just can't move air.
And you lost a lot of weight in that time because it affected the way that you ate. So what did you do in that space? What caused some relief for you?
So I think from a nutritional point of view, everything had to be pureed. So I can tell you which baby food should be banned. They're not just dreadful. But in terms of relief, Botox was the treatment at the time. They injected straight into the vocal cords, paralyzing those cords. Obviously, if they miss the vocal cord and they hit your vagus nerve, you are in trouble. So it was a very scary process going in every couple of weeks. But paralyzing the vocal cords allowed me to breathe. And that was even more, the voice component was one thing, but the inability to breathe was absolutely terrifying. When that didn't work, I had spacer plates put between my vocal cords. I've still got those, so I worked quite hard to speak. And then eventually a tracheostomy, so a hole at the base of my throat, which was an absolute godsend because it bypassed all of this. I breathed here and not through this vocal complex. And that was absolutely transformative.
There was something that struck me in your book. It was a moment where you decided to go pick the kids up for school, and then the kids for the school moved away from you. And you said there in the book that, you got home, you looked at what you looked like, and then you started putting on makeup again because I don't want to look sick. That kind of space that you were going through with your children, what were the key things that really helped you to start connecting with them?
So I think in anything, the last, Viktor Frankl says the last of our human freedoms is our ability to choose. And I had done work in play therapy at some point, and I just knew that the trauma that my children were experiencing, the parentification they were going through was so severe that if I didn't do something very intentionally, it was going to absolutely shipwreck their childhood. I mean, Natalie said, "Mommy, most children take the stairs through childhood. I took the lift." She was also the one who said, "Don't hide anything from us. No information could be worse than our imaginations." So I think we became very intentional. Spent time on my knees saying, "God, you've got to give me handles in this space." But cognitively, connecting into what is the story in your head, emotionally, what's your high, what's your low today. And behaviorally, they had the angry dance that we used to do. We used to put on music. I remember that. I wish I was a punk rocker. It became our all favorite song that we would literally shake it out and dance to. I didn't know about trauma release exercises, but I would get them to shake it out, get rid of the aggression in their bodies, breathe, slow their breathing down, imagine letting go all of this tension. And then we were very intentional about communicating. We put together an emergency plan. If mommy stopped breathing, what they would do. So each child had a role. And then we're as open as we felt we could be with them. I think also spiritually, it was really, really important that we connected. I think your faith can really get shipwrecked in a process like that. I had to let go of my why. I don't know why it all happened, but I did know who the author and the finisher of my faith was. And so for them also to learn to connect in with God, that he was ultimately their source, I think was really key. And we had rituals. We would get into bed together in the mornings. We had tea every single afternoon. So even though I couldn't shout down a passage or, yell, we made intentional time to eyeball, to sit, to have tea, to ask questions. And about 6 months in, they actually said, we feel more loved by a mommy with no voice than a mommy that had one.
It's quite fascinating. Talking about tea, the question about the title, because you had a title in mind and then it changed to this. Tell us that delightful story about how you got this title.
So the title is really different. It's really weird. I mean, I had someone say, I've bought your book. I can't wait to discover your recipes. It's not a recipe book. But I used to do top-end consulting. People flip houses. I helped to flip factories. And one of the organizations I consulted to, the general manager used to meet with me every month after I'd lost my voice. You know, a lot of people think when your voice goes or you sit with a profound disability, your cognition goes too. He was one of the few that didn't. And he would treat me so normally. He'd ask me business questions. He'd ask me about what they were doing, about their quality and their speed and all of these things and how to improve. And the one day I choked, because choking with this wide airway was such a huge problem. I choked all over him. Brown coffee all over his white shirt. And I said to him, why? I don't understand why. Tell me why you meet with me. And he said to me, you know, Kim, I was climbing Mount Elbrus, and he took out a picture and he showed me this peak, beautiful. And he said, at this point, I knew I would never summit. I was absolutely finished. But my Sherpa stopped and gave me hot tea and apricots. And because of that, I summited. And he said, you will summit too. You will walk through our doors one day again. And maybe all I'm doing is giving you hot tea and apricots. And I think the title is actually magnificent. You can't go through a journey as tough as we went through over as many years without many people being hot tea and apricots. And so I really gave it that title in the hope that it would be honoring of those people, but also that the book itself would be hot tea and apricots to other people on their journey of loss or trauma or just life, just doing life.
And I think it is. There was one of the things that stood out a lot to me is, you know, who is your enemy? So I think one of your children said that they hated the Botox, and you said the Botox is actually not my enemy. I think in life that's really important. Is sometimes we demonize a certain thing, but it's not that thing that's the problem. It's something else. Tell us a bit about that story.
So it was beautiful. I had this moment with Ryan, just sitting. I was going in for Botox again, and he and I were just sitting in the evening light. I just remember it like it was yesterday, this little boy, and seeing, wow, his swimming had changed. He started to get little muscles. He wasn't a little baby anymore, and was due to go in for Botox. And he just said to me, Mommy, I hate Botox, you know, and saying to him, but Ryan, Botox isn't the enemy. You know, Botox is such a gift. And I think so often we make each other the enemy. We're struggling with aggression, with fear, with anxiety, with loss, with grief, all these things that we're struggling with. And we can end up fighting each other and not the disease, or we can end up demonizing the wrong thing. And so I think that's really important as a family, realizing, wow, you know, that wasn't the enemy. It actually was such a gift to us. And I think too, Ryan was a great teacher for me. We had a family meeting the one day, and he said he wanted to talk about mom shouting. And Rob nearly fell off his chair. He said, Ryan, mom is mute. She can't shout. And he said it wasn't her voice shouting. It was her face, and it shouted the whole week. And so just realizing, you know, so much of what we're going through, we're actually manifesting in our behavior. And so being very careful about how we're showing up as well.
You know, it was a beautiful part in the last part of the book where you spoke about, you know, after you got cancer and you got through the treatment and your husband took you home to treat you. That to me was very beautiful in the space that he could help you. And it kind of reminds me of my husband, because my husband's that kind of person. If there's a crisis, you want to have him there. So yes, I said that I didn't want to cry, but I actually am already. But it was just, you know, the spaces that you created for connection in a time where something that we take for granted, our voices, when that was stripped, I found that really beautiful. But I also loved the visualization. There were two visualization things that stood out for me. The one part where you said that you imagined riding your bicycle and Jesus at the bicycle in the front, like looking back at you. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of expressing the joy that our faith can bring us and the hope. but there was something that your husband did that was so beautiful, where he asked you to visualize your future grandchildren. Just explain that moment to us.
We weren't going to cry, Kim. I had septicemia. I was in the East London hospital, and we didn't know if I was going to make it at all. I just had almost blown up like a little Michelin man. And the children had come in, and in effect, we didn't know if this was going to be goodbye or not. And when they left, I was just sitting there weeping. And he said to me, "You're incredibly ill." And he said, "If you can't fight anymore, it's okay. We'll be fine. You can go. You can let go." I mean, we don't have those hard conversations. And he just said, "Kim, you can let go." And I think he knew in that moment that him and the children weren't enough to hold me. And then he just said, "Kim, before you make that decision, just close your eyes. Can you imagine your first grandchild? Can you imagine smelling that milk breath, looking into their eyes and nibbling their toes or their ears, because I know you would do that. Can you imagine that?" And then he left. And I remember just lying in that bed, just saying, "Jesus, I choose life. I choose life. I choose life." And I kept imagining seeing that baby and looking into its face. And it was the most incredible thing as the pink dawn broke in that isolation ward, and the nurse came in all gowned up and masked and whatever. And I pointed to my Bible, and she put it on my lap, and I was too weak to even open it. And she opened it at Psalm 27, and it just said, "You will see the goodness of God in the land of the living." What an incredible promise. And I've lived to see and hold 4 of those beautiful little people. So I think the message in that for people is that there are times you can't hold on to hope, that it is so difficult to hold on to hope. But you can choose who you have in your space, and you need people like the man who said to me, "Hot tea and apricots," and that's maybe what I'm giving you, or a husband who can hold on to hope for you when it's so difficult for you.
The writing process, how long did it take for you to write this book?
So that's difficult to say, because I'd written, all of those years when I had no voice. From start to finish, probably about 2 years, because halfway through I actually got a head injury, and that delayed it immensely. Just working on a screen, working with words made me very nauseous and very emotional. So I had to take a break with a head injury. And yeah, it probably about a 2-year process.
Mm-hmm. And for people who are writing memoirs, what kind of advice would you give to them?
I think if you're going to write a memoir, be absolutely real and authentic. So the book is raw, it's very real. And we made a decision as a family. So the children, everyone made the decision that it had to be either raw and very authentic or not at all, because I speak into the disability space and the cancer space. So be authentic, be incredibly real. And if you are writing a memoir, I would also say, some people won't necessarily expose that memoir to others that are involved, but it's not just your story. It was also my children's story, and I had to be very careful what I spoke about and what I didn't. There's some stories I would have loved to have put in the book, but actually it's theirs. It was part of their story, not mine. And so I think be very careful in differentiating that, and then have second, third, and fourth eyes to look at it. Because yes, it is my memoir, and it absolutely is how I experienced it, but there were other people as well. And my children would say, "No, but we didn't use that word. We called you this, not that." Yes. So I tried to be as accurate as possible, because it was also their voice.
Where can people get this book?
So it's available on Amazon, on Take-A-Lot, in exclusive books, and any good books, good bookstores. I know that Bargain Books and Wordsworth have got it at the moment. And then, of course, you can get hold of me from the website on the back page, and I can supply it to you.
Another question, that moment where you had the first glimmer of hope that your voice would return, what was that like?
I think just extraordinary. You know, I was driving back from the hospital and coming down towards the zoo and stopped at a robot with my father, a traffic light. And I had a whiteboard and I was writing a question. So I would write a question, show it to him at the traffic light. He had time to answer because he couldn't lip read. He just froze with me. And he didn't understand. And I was, I think, feeling frustrated and wanting to get the question quickly before we went on. And suddenly there was this very faint whisper. And it was, I was so shocked, Kim. I really was so shocked. And I heard someone say, I think Kim's voice is coming back, but don't tell her. I'm thinking, are you kidding? Do you think I wouldn't know? And then obviously in that process, there were so many relapses, you know, as a flu or anything, any dust or whatever, you start coughing, your voice relapses again, there's nothing. But the most amazing moment was walking into Prof. Joseph's office and closing my trachea and going, hi, Prof. You know, and he just burst into tears. You know, he said, is this you? Is this how you sound? I said, I honestly don't care. My voice feels like it's coming back. You know, can you close my trachea? So it was just overwhelming. Absolutely. It's something you've held on to for so long. And then suddenly this absolute miracle coming to pass.
So I want to ask a little funny question as we close off. The difference between the words sorry and prostitute.
So it's so subtle, and it depends whether it's American sign or it's British sign, you know, and sign language is so specific even to provinces. So sign in Gauteng is different to Cape Town, and there are all these different nuances. But certainly Gavin, who taught us sign, sorry is this at the tin here, sorry, prostitute is this, probably because of the rouge and things like that was associated with Old English sign. So Ryan, in the sign class, he made a mistake and he wanted to say sorry to Gavin, and he did this, and Gavin burst up laughing. He said, Ryan, and when did you become a prostitute? And Ryan was horrified, and he said, no, there's such a subtle difference between sorry and prostitute. So don't get those words wrong.
Lovely. So, you know, I want to say thank you so much for giving me the privilege of reading this book. It deeply moved me. As a woman of faith, it really made a big impact on me, and it is just remarkable. Your journey has been raw and vulnerable, and thank you for honoring your family and your faith with inside that book so that people can get a little bit of glimpse, because yes, we live in dark times and we need to have some encouragement. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Kim. I think ultimately my hope is in Christ, and my family's hope is in Christ. And I don't think I could ever have done that journey or had the outcomes we have had, which have really been miraculous, if it wasn't our faith in Jesus Christ.
Super. So thank you very much for watching this episode of Write, Learn and Earn, for this really beautiful memoir. And I'd encourage everyone to buy it. It doesn't really matter if you've got a disability or anything like that. At the end of the day, it's one family that came together in the absence of sound. And I think that that's a really valuable lesson for us to learn when we're really busy, where we look past each other and we live past each other, that there's something really special inside this book. So stay tuned, subscribe for the next show. We'll see you then.